I will try and short retell this history of modern world after the USSR collapse and why USSR collapse really causing the old troubles in Western world. For Americans, for Western people, it will be very interesting if you listen to the end and understand some processes that happened right now in Western Europe, in USA, in Brazil, maybe Japan, Australia. So we have to start from the previous century, from 19th century. The political state of the things in the end of 19th century with economical forces is exchange and made industrialization, and industrialization of course demanded more workers in the cities, and industrialization that was happened in capitalism was a very slow process, and many countries that needed to make industrialization in them have to be like, have to understand, have to catch up, let's say. Sorry, I'm a little swimming in my thoughts. So, and industrialization happens right in between. Well, industrialization in countries such Great Britain, France, Germany already happened, already was ongoing, and collapse of Russian Empire and of course was caused, by the way, by inability of Russian Empire to industrialize its economy and transfer all workers, because workers wasn't effective, like slave workers, serfs, they wasn't effective producers, when in Western countries there was a lot of things happen because of it, because of this transfer should happen. Slavery died off because free workers produce much more productive, and therefore elites, industrial elites of the Western world attempted to free the people in the best interest of production forces, of new industrialized elites, and not for the benefit of people, of course. But Russian Empire collapse caused the Russian Revolution, of course, and the process that was ongoing in USSR, in Soviet Russia, first caused many changes that happens after in the Western world, because in the same time that Russian Revolution happens, many other countries also was in this situation, in revolutionary situation, when industrial complexes, industrial elites enforced too much on the working people, and working people just had enough of it, and they didn't see any options to go on any further, and the like exit from this, or escape from this situation, was communism, of course, which will provide workers the rights, provide workers the voice, etc. But here, of course, this guy who I'm retelling, he of course mentioned Wallerstein system of whereas there is center, there is periphery, there is semi-periphery, and many countries that was involved in this process, they was like peripheral, let's say, and they wasn't like major industrialized centers, and therefore they was used as resource bases. Of course, decolonization happened during the time. Decline of British Empire happened in the same time. France as empire collapsed during that time. First World War caused the German colonial politics collapse as German empire collapsed. So many processes came at one point, and the answer for such activities in the Western countries was liberalization and democratization. A revolution happens in Russia cause processes that was forced in other countries by the working conditions, by inability of workers to vote, of non-representation of women, let's say, and non-representation of black people or people who used to were slaves as voters. It means that there was no democratization reality in Western countries before the Russian Revolution happens. The Russian Revolution causes big slide and big movement in this direction, and democratization of Western societies. And only this process wasn't happening because Western countries like also beautiful and democratical, etc. No, in reality, Western elites, Western industrialized elites, bankers elites, they simply was afraid that the revolution going to come on their land, on their soil, and if it will happen, they will simply lose control. This guy provided example. In Sweden, the king saw what's happening in Finland, where was war between communists and capitalists, and revolutionary movement happens also in Sweden during the 1917, 1918, somewhere there. And Swedish king simply saw what's happening in Finland, and he simply called all elites of the country and said, do you want things to be like in Russia? And they say, no, of course not. Well, giddy up, get yourself together and give people rights, vote for people rights, provide people some social securities, and allow people to vote immediately, or I can't guarantee you nothing. And the process of democratization happens in the time in Sweden. This question is very important to understand the Western concept, and because it's more like European concept, and most of Americans think that European countries going in some socialistic way. In reality, that it's not what happened. In reality, Russian Revolution that was caused by objective processes of enslavement of not hard, but simply inhuman conditions for the working people in cities, for the working people in country. It was so bad that German or British workers never experienced such bad conditions, and therefore they was simply and in much better conditions. Germany, of course, could go that way, but Germany was involved in this building of industrialization, capitalistic industrialization, and when conditions for revolution happens in countries like United Kingdom or Germany or France, well, Germany was simply collapsed, and communist movement was very important during the time. Also, in United Kingdom and in France, there was big resources that allowed countries to still live at least well when industrialization, how to say, enslaved working people, and they was free, but they still was enslaved by their employers, and conditions, of course, was no better than some Russian worker at some production facility, at some fabric in Moscow or St. Petersburg. So those people simply can, British and French, and of course Americans, can provide their citizens higher standard of living because they have colonies during that time, and therefore they had more resources to share with their own people. And that's exactly what happened in those countries, because as I said, the bourgeoisie, the ruling class, the political elites, and industrial complex, of course, they simply understood that if we not going to provide the same rights for the people who for the working people, some democratization will not happen, voting rights will not be provided to people, to women, etc., like in Soviet Russia. Soviet Russia was the first country that provided equal rights for everyone, including women. It wasn't some kind of democracy. Maybe he told something about Australia and some other country, but think about what countries in the beginning of 20th century was some kind of republic. Only France, and in some kind of shape Switzerland, confederation. The rest of the countries was monarchies. It means that they operated still like in feudalism pretty much, but with capitalistic elites, of course. And therefore this process caused political elites, governments, and many other branches, let's say industrial complex, banking, caused them to change their politics to more liberalization, more liberalization, more democratization, providing social guarantees, like in Europe, free healthcare, free education, or something along those lines, because the threat of communism was more dangerous for a ruling elite than it was to lose the money, to lose the profits, let's say. And even situation that happened after the World War II, when all of a sudden in British Army that's supposed to be back from the war, communists prevail because they saw what they're fighting for. They understood the causes and they wish to get back at home and vote for communists. And maybe then ruling elite, queen, etc., industrial complex will lose their power. That is why Churchill made elections before the end of the war and not after. he don't want that the army men get back and vote the communists. And many changes happens since 1930s. Eisenhower provided his new economy, new form of economy. I don't remember what he said, but if you American, you must know what changes happens after the Great Depression in the United States. And Great Depression in reality wasn't a consequence of Great Depression wasn't overcome after the World War II. And in conditions that happened during that time, still many communist movements was in place in countries like France or Italy, because people who saw what fascism did, what capitalism did, and of course fascism is very, damn, I forgot the word, let's say fascism is capitalism on steroids, and Nazism is just outrageous steroids. Mean that still, even after the World War II, there was demand for social guarantees, for social security, for democratization of society, etc., etc. And the threat that the Soviet Union posed to Western capitalistic elites caused them to democratize the society and create democratization in societies of the Western Europe, of United States, Australia, even in some shape in Japan, of course. But this process was caused by existence of alternative for capitalistic system that was in place. And this capitalistic system, of course, have more resources, and of course, when USSR was behind the Iron Curtain, which pretty much was raised by the Western countries, not vice versa. Even though USSR was behind the Iron Curtain, yet in countries like France and Italy, where Western people can travel freely, there was big communist movements, there was communist parties, and there was like allies with, not allies, let's say friends with USSR, and people of course can learn how many things happen. Of course, there was a big threat of and misunderstanding of what, not misunderstanding, but let's say people was not very, react not very good at repressions that happens in Soviet Union. And the people saw how some of their friends that they have conversations just a few days ago just simply go straight into jail because reasons, sometimes without any reason, sometimes because of fails of the system, and therefore it turned away a little bit Western communist movements from communist way, let's say, from Soviet way, of course. But what do you expect? This system existed until when World War II ended. This system existed only 28 years, which not enough to build anything in reality. And to build a whole new system from the scratch, it's of course big job, and job was done from other side. There was no such effective and political industrialization happens in Soviet Russia faster than in any other country in the world. just in 20 years industrialization in Soviet Union happened, when previously there was like 85 to up to 90% of population that was working on land and farming the ground, yeah. In 1920s it was very industrialized society. In the Soviet industry produced enough products that allowed them to win the war pretty much single-handedly against the whole world except USA. So what I'm trying to get here, the existence of Soviet Russia made American and Western elites in general, American very slowly, because America was far away. America had its own internal resources, and whole Latin America is a colony pretty much, and therefore they can provide longer for their citizens and keep black people, women, not involved in politics and democratic process for longer. Therefore, like it was used to in Britain, in United Kingdom, in France, in Germany, previously to World War I. So the threat that people will understood, that people will demand the same rights, the same voting abilities, the same real democratic process in their country, and also what if those people really understood what communism is about. That communism is to take away rights of the employer to exploit you, and you are as an employer, of course, will be much more generous for yourself, and you of course keep the profits for yourself instead of giving it up to some rich fat cat. So, and of course in those terms people will lose, some people, elite people, will lose control over the money they have, the control they have, etc. But of course, the problem never went away in reality. Well, yeah, the governments and political elites and industrial elites was a mutual agreement that something needs to be changed in order to don't let the communist threat come to Western countries. So people never wish to revolt against the ruling class, revolt against the things that happen. Therefore was created social security in the United States, welfare state, the same welfare state in France, the same things happen in Sweden, in Britain, of course, the same thing happened. But, and here's the catch, very important catch that Americans don't understand what happened. Americans especially, and of course many people who believe in American propaganda in the West, simply can't understand what is happening right now in their countries. And it's pretty simple concept. The threat of existence of alternative, of different way to do economy, different way to do real democratic process, was a threat not for the people of the countries, but for elite of the country, for the political elite, for governmental overall elite, people who really in control of the government for decades, for industrial elites, for the banking elites, for financial elites. And today this process simply turned back around, let's say. With the collapse of the USSR, this threat is simply disappeared, and therefore today's political and of course financial elites, they see that there is no threat anymore, and therefore they need to simply make a demontage of previously created for the people social securities, welfare states. The privatization of the healthcare happened right now in Europe. Privatization of the education, the same thing happened in Europe when in decline of the welfare state overall in many countries happened, and this is what is happening really in the Western countries today, in capitalist countries. Russia is of course also capitalist, but we still have this process of course going, but there is a very important point to understand. In such conditions, it's not about any kind of communist propaganda, it's not about any kind of socialist movements, etc. But I will get back to this later. It's not about this. It's about a non-existent threat, the threat that ceased to exist for Western capitalistic financialists that the threat that ceased to exist provided them this idea that, well, the system anyway can't go on any longer anyway. Capitalism ended as it was before. The liberal, let's say, the last form of capitalism, neoliberalism, it ceased to exist pretty much in 2008, and that's it. This system can't change itself. It needs in some kind of reshape the world, let's say. So a system will cease to exist, and for the covidiots, of course, who think that it's about OB, etc., really, pandemic have absolutely no real threat to economical state of the things, because if it was, pretty much economies will collapse immediately. But economy is still alive. It means that pandemic pretty much did nothing. So today, what is happening today in Western countries in reality, it's not some kind of communist overtook, that it's not about socialist overtook, it's not about some communist propaganda or those socialists everywhere. Not at all. Vice versa. There is demontage of social policies in countries like United States, Germany, Sweden, France, of course, with raise of the pension age, the age when pensioners get out of the workforce. And this process is happening in every Western country today. The social guarantees that used to was financed from the let's say colonizations, from appropriation of resources of different countries, third world countries, how to say it, well, let's say the resources that center soaked up from colonies went partly as a rent for the citizens of those countries, to make sure that they will never adopt or will never get interested in communist ideas. What you see happening today in your countries, it's demontage of those social and democratic changes that was made during the 20th century, the second half maybe of the 20th century. Many democratic achievements of the world today, and this whole American thing about freedom of speech, freedom of voting, freedom of having guns, it's so total bullshit. such a total bullshit, absolutely. They do not even understand that all those things was sponsored and provided for them by capitalistic elites, because they simply don't want so people to see how they was exploited, the working people was exploited, how American elites and Western elites in general, how they privatized the profits of all those wars that the United States made. So this is not about your freedoms. This is not about democracy at all. And even this herd mentality that mob rule is bad mean that you count yourself as stupid. You yourself count yourself as stupid. And this demontage of social and democratic changes that was made is a very important concept to understand for the Western people. And it means simply that American and Western elite, financial Western elites, they pretty much no more care about the people. That is why you see socialist movements in United States, socialist movement in countries like France or ex-Soviet Warsaw Pact bloc countries. That's why you see more people on real communist ideas in countries like Germany, France, maybe even Sweden. I don't really know, but because these democratic changes that was made, these social guarantees for people that was made by Western elites, today is simply just going away. Welfare shrinking, support for poor people shrinking, etc., etc. And some people really opened their eyes, and they, in reality, they understood what is happening right now. How those demontage of those things will affect them, and affecting them already. How capitalistic system is unable to provide them in reality. And this all like fake world as it was. And this is very interesting concept for Americans to consider, instead of running around blaming some non-existent commies, Biden socialist, Bernie Sanders is socialist. Don't make me laugh. This demontage of those democratic and social guarantees are causing the rise of the socialist and left-wing movements. Yes, of course, for now they overtaken by capitalist Western financial elites, like Black Lives Matters, like Antifa movement in the United States, some protests in France. By the way, another guy said that, sorry, or the same guy said that in France they was mutual agreement. We people get on some riots, not riots. We get on some protest. We come, we demand, and you as a government must, well, make a deal with us. It was mutual agreement for many decades. But Macron suddenly, all of a sudden, like it was with pensioner reform, pensioner reform, I don't know how to say it right. They raised the age for the pensions and for the pensioners, and people went out to protest and pretty much halt the, how to say it, halt the transportation in country. And yet Macron simply don't give the fuck about that day. It was very how to say it, cold shower for these people, that Government doesn't care about them anymore, and the same thing, exactly same thing happened right now in the United States. Whether it was Trump or before, well, yes, let's say Obama was like still in those conditions that he had to deal with people, he had to make deals with people. Today, not anymore. Trump is not abiding to, how to say, not obligated to do anything for people. Instead of this, he is totally 100% doing everything to protect corporations instead of people. Of course, it's very hard concept for Republicans to understand, for conservatives to understand that instead of helping people, in reality, Trump helping only corporations. But that's another topic. So, and this situation happened all over. And that is why you see the communist movement rising everywhere. It's pretty dubious to say, dubious, or I don't know, it's not obvious how it's going to end finally. Financial elites losing control. They think they can demontage the systems, but they also cannot support those systems anymore. Look at the amount of debts that governments have, only to support such social state of things in their countries. Look at the amount of debts. Endless wars by United States and different countries provided them enough resources to supply their citizens with higher standards of living, but it demanded a huge amounts of the debt, and still all profits, all capital still accumulate right now in the hands of fewer and fewer in reality. All those financial instruments in their hands, and it means that what is going to be in the end full-on fascism, maybe even sometimes Nazism, which is much more like aggressive form of capitalism and desperation, let's say. What it will be in reality. It's a very important topic to talk about, because it's even a very important topic to think about, because Americans, as I see, and Western people, many Western people, they clearly do not see any real problems in their society. Instead, they believe propaganda. They think that if things were like this, like for previous 40 years, or maybe even sometimes 30, because real industrialization, let's say, not forced revolution, but cipherization, let's say, informationization happens only 30 years ago, really. And people think that if they lived like that for the previous 40 years, therefore they're going to live like this forever. And yes, this kind of illusion was created for you artificially, because financial elites clearly understood that if they not provide you, you will take yourself. Of course, it's also mean that there is no real, how to say, there is no real driving force from below, as people say in the United States. We have freedoms, we have that, we have this, and we can do whatever we want and demand everything from the government. Well, try now. Look at what's happened. Trump don't give a fuck about those Black Lives Matters movement. Don't give a fuck about any kind of socialist parties. Believe me, the same shit will going to happen right now with Biden. Biden, of course, will want to provide for the people the same social guarantees that was provided by neoliberals for the previous years, but amounts of the debt can simply borrow those ideas and they're simply just in the grave. Because Biden is represent the same old elite. Something need to be changed right now, of course, in the United States, and in some shape or form, of course, Trump represents the changes. Trump represents the changes because he is not a politician. He is not in any way independent. He simply not a politician. It means that you can blame him, Trump, that economy collapsed and say it was done by Trump and therefore economy collapsed and we are politicians, we are financiers, we are not to blame here, as this guy, consistent conservative, said that government create policy for the subprime loans, forced banks to give subprime loans. You really think that government really interested in put people that could not repay the debt in the debt? No, of course not. They were forced to do that by corporations that need consumers and people who today, people who yesterday couldn't afford to buy himself a car, a house, I don't know, TV or something minor even, right? Today, suddenly, all of a sudden, government provided guarantees with their federal obligations for the banks. Banks borrow the money, still making profits off of it because of financial multiplicator, and provide consumers for the corporations that overproduced. They simply don't know who to sell their products anymore. The crisis of overproduction that I talked about in other videos is a very real thing. And the crisis of overproduction even in the food industry, which is simply ridiculous. In the United States itself, in Mexico, people dying from starvation, literally dying from starvation, children dying from starvation sometimes. And yet you throw away millions of tons of food. It's just mind-boggling to me. So, overall, you have to understand that no process is happen on its own. Like, this mentality is very, very ridiculous for me. That, I don't know, if you can support yourself, if you can feed yourself for $2 a day, all you need is $60 a month. What, you can't make $60 a month? Easy. Just collect the aluminum cans and change them for the money, and you will have enough. But in reality, it doesn't work that way. It absolutely doesn't work that way. It's much more complex problem. Homeless in the United States today, yes, they are in better conditions than working people. That's a ridiculous situation. Really, people who work, who have house and car, in much worse situations sometimes than homeless people. If you have nothing, well, you will be fed, warm, provided with some clothing. If you have huge amounts of debts and you could not pay them out, what you gonna do? You will go to the second job or to the third job. You will work 24 hours a day just to keep up, which is impossible, of course. So, I wanted to retell the story just simply to show that there is objective processes that happen right now in the world, in the capitalistic world, in capitalism itself. The obvious process that really started 100 years ago, or even more. The real process that only new technologies allowed to slow down and new resources that was found allowed to like prolong in the future. In reality, we live in the debt for the future generations, and we will never be able to repay the debt. And all this happened only because Western financial elite decide that communist threat for them personally much more dangerous than all the profits they can get. And they exchange their profits, share of their profits, of course, not all. They exchange share of their profits, and much more of that produced by you Western people, by European and American workers, produced all those profits for those corporations and financiers. They shared a part of it in exchange of social securities guarantees, some democratization of the societies. But today, when USSR collapsed and there is no real threat of communism anywhere, well, small movements like Bernie Sanders in the United States or some communists somewhere in Germany, France, or United Kingdom is insignificant for financial elites. They think they can handle it. It means that no support anymore for you, working people. No democratic elections, no demands from the people taken anymore, no welfare state, of course, no social securities, privatization of education and healthcare, which is pretty good shown that it's piece of shit if privatized in example of United States, Brazil and Russia today, which is total shit. Healthcare not privatized yet, but very much privatized today, is total shit. Don't believe people who say that private enterprises, privateers, private property will solve all the problem. Bullshit. Bullshit. They will make it worse. Way worse. As with covidians today. So, even the idea that today, changes that happen today in American society, in European society as whole, is some kind of communist, is so stupid. Those changes absolutely 100% anti-communist, anti-people, anti-social, and pro-corporations, pro-financialists, pro-banks, pro-rich people, pro-governments, etc., etc. They again taking away your freedoms. Yes, many American people today running around screaming that they take away our freedoms. Yes, only there is one small problem: you never had real freedoms except one, talking shit everywhere you want, which is absolutely insignificant and change nothing, and well, let's say change nothing. And they taken away, yes, they taken your rights away. Your right to have a vote that matter, your right to have a voice that matter, your right to do something that matter as unions before can demand the social changes. Today, no more gonna happen. The financial elites decide that you not worth it anymore, that their profits much important for them, and there is no threat of communism. Therefore, people no more need all those democratic changes, all those social guarantees, etc. No, everything is fine. They think they can handle it, and maybe they can, but I wouldn't be so sure if I was them. Of course, today people brainwashed way deeper than it was 100 years ago, and yet it worked. In case of the Germany, it perfectly worked. Brainwashed people went to the war and fought in the war that was absolutely 100% not needed for them. When they create simply the same shit that was created by Soviet Union and create communism in Germany, create communism in France, force communism in United Kingdom and all over Europe and create a better society. But no, they decide they need to kill some barbars in the East and it will solve all their problems. No. So, I know, probably no one going to watch this video and no one going to listen to this video, but I don't know, I still want to share it, and if someone will be interested, that's great. Maybe I can help someone, maybe I can, I don't know, make some person thinking. I'm not good at explaining, and sadly there is no sources in English that I can provide. Most of my sources, of course, is people who study economy from the other side, from the how to say, political economy side, and they have very different views and clear open mind about things that happen right now in the world, and the things that happen used to in the world. But they sadly all in Russian because it's most advanced. And yeah, one more thing that this guy said, it's the only beneficiary right now in the whole world is China, that do not demontage their own communist ideas altogether. They keep some of it in some shape, in ideology, but of course they still go in the same way as Russia do, as Turkey do, and that's the process of democratization, or reverse democratization. Even China doing it because they went full on capitalism way. So the China can still benefit from it, of course, but in what shape or form, even Chinese economists doesn't know, or historians or sociologists this guy talked to. They don't know. They don't know what way today China will go. And even this American idea that China all bad and they also awful and they wanted to took over us. No, in reality, your system is collapsing and China have a little bit of, like say, not different system, but a little bit of memories about how it can be different way. I mean, they have some perspective on alternative that there is, that existed in USSR and in Warsaw-Pact countries. And that alternative is very tempting for the people, the workers. And therefore, maybe China will go back to communist way and to declaring that China is communist, 100% communist totalitarian regime. That's simply stupid. Yet, yes, they have this ideology, basic ideology, books, economy, clear understanding of processes that is happening right now in the world. How far they went on the capitalist way, I can't know. I'm not an economist and not sociologist, let's say. That's not my, of course, specialty, and nothing is my specialty in reality. So I can say, but even this guy who talked about this process that happened, whose words I'm translating to you, let's say, even this guy can provide an answer what's going to happen with China, where they go from here when capitalism finally will collapse. Well, let's say when this shape of economy will collapse. It's collapsing for past 100 years. It's not overnight process at all. If crisis can happen overnight because of actions of somebody, with socio-economical systems it's not like that. There's backs and forths, and maybe there is on the horizon a new socialist state that can finally took over and get rid world from the elites, from financial elites, capitalistic elites that today thriving on working people. It's very complex question, and everything in reality is very complex question. There is no blacks and whites. There is all kind of shades of gray and all kind of colors of the rainbow, and it's very complex questions, and you need to understand it. You need to at least consider the different opinion, like many Americans today, many conservative, of course, many conservative today simply can't understand. Listen to, I don't know, Wolf, D.R. Wolf, I think. Richard Wolf, R.D. Wolf. Richard Wolf, listen to him. He is of course a liberal, but still he is far to the socialist side, as you can find. Trying to search information from other sources. Try to read Lenin, try to read Stalin, try to read Marx after all, to begin with. Maybe you'll find some answers to your questions there, because these blind beliefs that provided to you by Alex Jones, by Donald Trump, by some experts like computer guy, Dave Cullen, experts, ridiculous things. That is not an expert. That is people who simply thriving on sensationalism. They creating big stories out of nothing and tell you how bad things and who to blame. That's it. They do not even open the question. They do not ask in the questions. They simply just useful tools. In case of Alex Jones, of course, I wouldn't be so sure. Maybe he is some kind of ideologist of this shit. But he's still a useful tool. I guess we can wrap it up. And one more thing, I already said that, but there is no demand from the bottom of any changes in reality, and no changes forced from the bottom. As Americans, many Americans think that their voice means something, that their freedom of speech means something. In reality, it does not. All changes, all democratic changes, was forced by existence of Soviet Union, of alternative to capitalist system, and forced from the USSR to the elite, to Western elite, and already from Western elite it was forced to Western governments, and then implemented by them. It wasn't from the bottom. And today the demontage of those democracy values, of social securities, is also coming from the top, not from the bottom, for those who still think that their voice matters. It isn't. In reality, it isn't. Well, make changes. Make your voice heard. You can rule your country. Why don't you want that? It's mind-boggling for me.